to Juniper Level Botanic Garden. I hope everyone's enjoying their day here. It's nice temperatures, pretty sunny, overcast balance, so it's not too hot, not too cold. Today we're going to talk about, I think in a lot of respects, kind of controversial for people, because every person in their yard and garden is going to have a perspective that is not going to be shared by every other person. So when we start using terms like friend or foe, your friend might be his foe. Anyway, so we're going to try to talk about the balance that we need to strike between our gardens and nature, and then to realize that our gardens cannot exist as an isolated bubble devoid of nature, because plants and animals, including humans, are part of nature, and we will always be dependent upon it. So when we think about friends or foes, a lot of times that is perspective, a lot of it is cultural, a lot of it's regional, a lot of it is individual. And it also, a lot of it can be, what are your goals? What is your objective with your yard? So first of all, let's ask people a few questions. How dependent do you think plants in a garden like this are on insects?
Very much so.
100%.
Let's see.
At 90%.
Probably depends on the plant, but it also depends on what aspect of the plant you're thinking about. Are you thinking about pollination and its reproductive strategy? Because that is not the only service insects provide for plants. So it really becomes problematic. Does anyone know how many species of flowering plants there are in the world?
Millions.
The argument, no, between 250,000 and 300,000. We're all familiar with insects, lots of different groups. Kind of a shocking number. There are more species of just beetles than there are all flowering plants. That's just one group of insects. So when we stop to think about how important are insects to plants, they're hugely important. And we're going to start with insects, because when most people think friend or foe, first thing that comes to mind are the bugs. This bug's eating my plant. This bug, I think, is killing my plant. And that's one of the foes that we often recognize first and foremost. Also, a lot of us kind of have a cultural fear or dislike for bugs unless they are pretty, or unless we view them as, but that same principle or mindset can pretty much be applied on any group of animals. So butterflies are good, and oftentimes beetles are bad. However, some butterflies can actually, as their larvae, be huge pests on some plants, whereas the beetle that the person may dismiss and not like is actually a predatory insect that's a huge benefit to have in your garden. So just because something's big and showy and pretty and visible doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best one at the moment in the garden. So anyway, are there any questions? No questions so far? Let's take a walk. I don't know how many things we're going to see, hopefully some. When people think of other foes in the gardens, things like squirrels, somebody else name another furry, friendly, warm animal that a lot of people get in their yards they don't like?
Bunnies.
Bunnies. What's another one?
Deer.
Voles. Deer. We've got bunny. What about squirrels?
I got tons of chipmunks.
See, I used to not mind my squirrels until they got into my bog garden and ate all my Venus flytraps.
Do you have deer in here eating flowers?
Oh, we have deer, yes. And as much as we would like to think that we can keep them out,
Yeah. Okay.
we have full open
Do
road
they
to
eat your
solve.
begonias down to nubs?
Yes, they get into our begonias. The deer, I think, have probably tried and sampled about every kind of plant we have in the garden, and we have 27,000 plants in the garden. They certainly show an interest in some plants over others. Now, when we talk about friends or foes, how many people like having things like deer and bunnies in your yard? Raise your hand. Go on and raise your hand. I do, because I like nature. How many of you like having plants in your yard? I do too. How many of you have to fight the battle of the plants and the animals? One of the things that we can do is a lot of times look at, first, our objectives. Second, where is it that we're living? Are we close to the city? Are we removed from the city? Are we in the wilderness? Because obviously the further out you get from the city, the more likely you are to have interactions, and possibly negative interactions, with more and more wildlife. My goal has always been to maximize biodiversity. One of the things we try to achieve here in this garden is maximizing biodiversity, which means the more species of plants and animals that we can have, not only is it suitable for the garden, but it's also suitable for visitors. It's also suitable for the wildlife. Some of the biggest foes that people run into in the garden, and I have to concur, voles. How many of you have had to fight voles? We always fight voles. We fight voles here too. Can anyone name the best natural control agent for a vole? Yeah. Absolutely not. Not even close.
They're effective.
Stones?
Black snake.
Those poison pellets, how's that?
Even worse.
Oh, God.
How many of you would knowingly kill an owl or a hawk? When you use baits, you're unknowingly doing a lot of that. So I want to kind of point out, there's a time and a place, and there are methods, and I'm not going to say baits aren't wouldn't say take them off the table, but you have to be really careful, because among some of your best controls for voles and rodents are actually birds of prey. And when an animal is compromised by a pesticide or a poison, oftentimes it's an easier target for a predator. And then many of those can in turn go up the food chain and become a bigger issue for the natural control agents. And when the natural control agents are removed, what does the vole population do?
Increase.
Goes up. So again, trying to strike that balance. I know some people have, yes sir?
Voles love these hostas.
Voles love hostas.
With the little rocks in the bottom, you plant them with rocks?
That is one technique.
That's what I do.
When we're talking about friends or foes in the garden, which can be bugs, they can be weeds. I'm not even going to address weeds because we've already talked about plants and animals, and I can't even take on the whole planetary system of living things that are potential pests. So we're going to kind of focus on animals. But cultural practices. But cultural practices can also involve right plant, right place. And so a lot of times we look at plants and we really want that plant, and we have in our mind where it's going to go, but that may not be the most suitable place for that plant because you may be putting that plant in a target zone. So sometimes we have to think about where we live, where it's a good place to put something a little bit out of the way. And a lot of us want to plant in groups or use it as a border, which, excuse me, that's basically nothing more than a salad bar. So a lot of times planting the same plant as a border, that just is inviting something like deer. Control for voles or any kind of rodents, including even bunnies. Things like snakes, foxes, birds of prey. And so these are kinds of things we want to encourage, and by encouraging them, you also want to maximize the biodiversity, the flora in your garden. So the more types of plants and also layers. When you look around this garden, what are some of the things you notice?
Variety.
And it's layered.
Yeah.
So we have low underbrush, we have mid, and we have canopy, which is going to give and harbor a lot of different species of animals, which as a general rule, nature begins to kind of balance and monitor and control itself. So the more diversity that you can put into your garden, that's also going to encourage your animal diversity, which is going to discourage basically monoculture, pest coming in, taking out your flower garden that's in the middle of the open.
Why did you say no for controlling voles? I mean cats. Why did you say no to cat controlling voles?
Cats, first of all, aren't native. I'm not a cat hater. I like cats. I grew up in a household with cats. The reality of cats, the collateral damage they do to wildlife that's not pests is horrific.
Okay, that's true.
They are.
I don't like cats either, but I
No. I want to. I do not. I did not say I dislike cats. What I'm saying is that they are not an optimum control method for a lot of pests. They are a Band-Aid on a really big wound, because you will see the occasional rodent that the cat gets. But in reality, the cat's not as effective a predator as are a lot of the native animals that have evolved in conjunction with the said pest, like a vole. I've never seen a cat that can go down a vole hole, but I've seen a lot of snakes that can. And so things like that really oftentimes. So a lot of times about tolerance. Now, to address some of the questions, would anyone like to comment on your own personal gardens, your own personal objectives, and some of maybe your own personal issues that you've run into in gardening?
My garden's 3 years old, and just going off of what you said, year 2, we had tons of chipmunks. chipmunks hole popping everywhere. I saw maybe one snake. This year, I've already seen 5 snakes. I see them hanging out over the brush where the chipmunks like to hide.
How many chipmunks?
How many?
How many have you seen now, chipmunks versus snakes?
Still a bit, but probably less than last year. But I can see that, you know, things are starting to balance out. And now I'm having the explosion of bunnies, and hopefully, you know, this year, next year, I have seen a fox go through the yard, but it seems like, you know, once you get over the hump of the explosion in the prey population and the predators.
There's always going to be that kind of a wave because the resource has to rebound before the predator, and then as the resource dwindles, so there's always going to be that lag. One of the things that I've done in my yard, and I'm kind of trying to work with some of my neighbors, is where there's greenways and power cuts, try to connect corridors that allow wildlife to move back and forth, because a lot of times they really have nowhere else to go.
Right.
And when you're dealing with really expansive residential areas that every third house might have a hedge, they're really kind of jumping from cover to cover. If they can have those corridors, nature can self-regulate, and then there might be less interest to go out in the open. So when animals, particularly wild animals, are offered cover, they prefer the cover over the open. But when the cover is fragmented and you're facing more open, they really don't have a lot of other options.
For a very shady backyard where mosquitoes love to hang out, what do you recommend?
Anything and everything around your house that contains or holds water or potentially holds water, dump it out constantly. Cultural control.
Problem, but it's the leaf litter. I think it's the leaf litter. It's just breeding everywhere.
Is the leaf litter holding water?
I think
Because-
it's like the property next to me is just a vacant lot. It just has a bunch of leaf litter. There's not
See.
anything holding water, but it's
Mosquitoes are a huge issue, but control of mosquitoes can be a bigger issue because what do most people want to do?
Yeah, spray.
Spray 'em.
Reality of it is that is about the duration of the length of this program as far as its effectiveness. However, the other things, collateral damage that it kills, way high. Mosquito control is one of the reasons that we've seen a decline in a lot of insects we perceive as beneficial, like butterflies. The practices in Florida with mosquito control have knocked Florida's butterfly populations down to about, by 70%. So, water. And I had this conversation with my neighbor because she was constantly having them come spray for mosquitoes. She never dumped her bird bath. She had buckets and things around, and I talked to her one day and we walked over there. Mosquito wrigglers and almost everything. It's like you realize you can just turn these upside down if they hold water. You're not gonna. So mosquitoes oftentimes, again, cultural control. Reduce your water, flowing water, still water with dragonflies and minnows. You can get mosquito fish, they're native. But anything that's going to hold water that doesn't have something that's going to eat the mosquito larvae is going to breed mosquitoes. And that's even with bird baths. Change them out every 2 or 3 days. It's easy. Just tilt, refill.
I had someone tell me put a tablespoonful of olive oil in your pool. Does that work for mosquitoes? Evidently it covers them.
Well, it kills everything. Kills your dragonflies too.
One tablespoon of olive oil does all that.
It's a surfactant, just like a soap. Oils and soaps are broad spectrum. So again, if you're looking at friend or foe, sometimes the practices we do to control something like a pest, actually the collateral damage is has a far greater negative impact, because when you begin to reduce, a lot of times you don't realize how much, as bad as the mosquitoes may be, you don't realize how bad they are until whatever else was out there controlling them is now out of the system.
I only did one time.
Yeah.
I get it, Steve.
No, but yeah, no, I mean, these are things people do. These are things that are recommended. But the best way to do it, don't allow things around your house to collect and hold water. So dump, bird baths, clean them out frequently. But anything that's going to hold water can be potentially problematic.
Thank you.
What about squirrels? I have like 3 massive oak trees and it's just squirrel paradise. But they're like such a pest that they'll take tomatoes right off the vine. They'll just eat 2 pieces of it and throw it away. And then they'll dig out any new plant that I put in the ground. They'll dig it out and I would have to replant it basically on a daily basis.
Get you some hawks.
There are
I
Hawks take
have
care of 'em.
several hawks in my neighborhood. And they still,
people
Feed the
have
hawks.
tried things like the plastic owls and hawks.
Yeah.
What you do have to do, though, periodically is move them around. If they stay in the same place all the time, as dumb as you like to think, yes, well, they're kind of like that. It's not going anywhere. There are some chemical controls that really aren't lethal, and one of them involves hot sauces. And there are several things on the market that, and the same for deer. They're capsaicin based, which is hot pepper, like mace, pepper spray. You want to mix a little bit of Dawn dish soap, a little bit of castor oil, and water. You kind of read the instructions, balance it out. Clear the mulch from the base of your plant, spray that. Lightly spray the plant. Be sure to hose it down, and you don't want oils and things accumulating on the plant. But that hot sauce, how many of you have ever gotten hot pepper in your mouth, nose, or eye?
Oh, yeah.
Most animals have a much higher sense of smell, therefore more reactive, and all mammals tend to be able to perceive hot. So it burns the nose, burns the mouth. So those are some things that can be used for squirrels.
I love that, actually.
And there's a product.
Pain.
It's called something. I don't even know if I want to name the. Look up squirrel. Look up hot sauces, because there's some products out there that are, and they can be deer repellent, because none of these animals particularly like. But you have to be careful with the dosages and how you apply it to your plants so you don't burn your plants. Because anything that's contain oils and soaps leave residues on foliage. And so those things can act, especially if the plant is exposed to sun, that can intensify, kind of like you laying out in the sun with baby oil, and it's going to cook. But you can actually do that, but then all you got to do is wash your vegetables.
Oh, okay.
Dawn dish soap, that'll take, because the hot sauce is oil-based. It's one of the reasons why when you eat a hot pepper, you try to drink water and it doesn't go anywhere, it just seems to spread. Because hot, spicy is oil-based and it just adheres. So you try to wash it off with water, you just spread it. So squirrels can be a huge problem. And I've run into that myself. Fortunately, now I have 2 dogs that love squirrels, so they keep on.
Do you have any possums out here?
You know, we do have possums out here once in a while, but I don't know that possums have ever done anything other than...
Well, they dig up the ground. Do they eat anything? Plant? They dig up the ground.
They eat a lot of things, but mostly like bugs, and they're kind of opportunistic. I've never noticed possums.
In my swimming
Ticks.
pool.
They eat a lot of
You got a
ticks.
possum in the swimming pool?
Yeah, he's swimming around. And I said, man, you own your own.
Well, they got stuck in your swimming
He walked
pool.
up the steps and walked out.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wish I had a
They do eat a lot of ticks, though. Possums eat a lot of ticks. I don't know that we've ever had problems with possums here. I mean, we've seen them, but I can't say that I can definitively attribute any particular activity or damage in our garden to possums. They tend to just kind of sit there and look at it. I don't even think their vision's that good. They just kind of...
Don't you have to capture and release possums?
Oh, that's the best thing to do.
I think so.
That's the best thing to do.
I do.
I always recommend non-lethal, with the exception of some really bad insect issues in which you have to at some point in time, depending on your garden, your plants. I try to recommend people steer away from non-lethal, try to use cultural.
Someone recommended to me plant a lot of clover in your lawn. My biggest problem are rabbits. Plant a lot of clover, they'll go for the clover rather than your garden plants. But could that also just bolster a larger rabbit population? Like, is that beneficial? Is it a wash?
That's a good question. And you know, when you, and not you personally, but when we address a question like that, what's really interesting is that his situation, your situation, if you were dealing with the same thing, there's so many variables that a lot of times it's hard to say that there's a one answer for any given, because any given place is going to be a little different in its variables. As far as planting more clover, I don't know that you're going to necessarily encourage more rabbits. It might deter the rabbits from going after your plants if they prefer clover, but that's the operative part, if they prefer clover. They may have a preference still for something else in your garden. Unfortunately, with rabbits, I don't know of too many controls outside of natural predators or domestic predators like cats or dogs.
Right.
My dog's pretty much anything in the yard, so they can open the door, they see it, they don't kill it, but most of the wildlife is kind of like, he's got dogs here. So I don't battle it quite as much. Plus with the dog activity, just the smell that the dogs leave around the yard. And I mean, these are also options. Like I said, cats and dogs are great deterrents. I don't know how effective they are actually with control. And I know you said that you had some other, you had mentioned, are there any other questions that?
Let's see, I said squirrels.
You talked about squirrels.
Mosquitoes were the other thing, but like the solution for me, because I don't want to spray, because I have a lot of fireflies, and I'm scared if I spray anything, it'll probably kill them. But like I was gonna make just a water feature that's attractive to dragonflies and predatory species. I've also heard swallows, bats. People build a lot of bat houses, but supposedly swallows actually eat twice as many mosquitoes per body weight.
Well, I was about to say, you know, the interesting thing, bats and swallows are both insectivores, but you have to look at the time in which they're active. When are mosquitoes active?
At night.
No.
No, like at 5 o'clock when I'm on the front porch.
They're crepuscular.
It's like dawn.
Crepuscular.
Yeah,
They are sunrise, sunset, that narrow band of gray.
yeah.
Bats, for the most part, are nocturnal. So bats are feeding on insects that are primarily nocturnal, that being moths. A lot of little moths, a lot of mayflies, things like that. Whereas dragonflies and swallows, a lot more mosquitoes. With water features, and you'll notice with a lot of our water features, you have a combination of still water. Let's walk this way. I know we're supposed to limit these to 15 minutes. I don't know how much more time we have. I'm happy to talk to you guys as long as you want to listen.
Yeah. The crepuscular nature of mosquitoes is another knock against the sprays, because oftentimes when they're spraying, that's during the daytime. When
Correct.
Are hidden under bars.
Correct.
And
So you're basically killing all your bees and your butterflies and your flowers.
doing nothing. And mosquitoes have like a 1 mile radius
Yep.
where they go. So even if you spray your entire yard, if you calculate, like I saw this calculation, average yard size versus, the square footage of 1 mile radius. Maybe you would, if you kill every single mosquito in that area, you might kill, it was like 1/10,000.
Oh yeah, no. Mosquito spraying is purely a feel-good, I've controlled mosquitoes in my yard. Here, the sprays we use are deterrents. So there's a strong smell that really just kind of deters. You'll notice with our water feature elements are composed of multiple segments: flowing and still. Mosquitoes do not breed in rapidly flowing water. So if you're ever interested in water features, moving water does not breed mosquitoes in the numbers that still water. Mosquitoes prefer still water that is predator absent. No dragonflies, no tadpoles, no fish, no bigger bugs that eat other bugs. That's really what mosquitoes need, which is why a lot of times in suburban areas and urban areas, they're horrific. Because there's always little puddles on roofs of buildings. There's always buckets and pots, cups, mugs, beer cans, things that have collected just enough water that mosquitoes can breed in. So as you see, we have flowing running water. Flowing running water is great for salamanders. We have several species of salamanders in some of our flowing water. There are a few dragonflies and damselflies that can withstand flowing water that are going to eat other bugs. But as we move down here to the still water, and we do have mosquitoes in the garden. Sometimes they're a little worse than others, but I will certainly say the mosquito issues we run into in our garden are really, really small compared to even some of the areas that I ran into when you get further into the city in Raleigh.
Do you have ladybugs actually?
What is this?
Ladybugs?
Yes, they do. They will. Ladybugs will eat anything they can catch. Ladybugs, though, are slow. So they're really good at getting scale insects and getting aphids. Then when you look at our pond here, which is still water, we have a lot of fish. And there is some, you see this system is all connected because it's pumped from this pond back up, it flows, but not really going to be able to see it now. But on a day when we haven't had so much rain and the water's a little bit clearer, these ponds are full of little tadpoles, they're full of small frogs, they're full of mosquito fish. Here you go, you can come over here. See the little fish? These are mosquito fish, Gambusia. And they're really easy to keep even in relatively small pools, water elements in a yard. They're pretty easy fish to keep, and they're called mosquito fish because they really target little bugs like mosquito wrigglers. Other things we have here around the pond, we have red-bellied water snakes, we have several species of frogs, including a couple species of tree frogs. The frogs eat the bugs, the baby snakes eat the bugs, the baby snakes eat the tadpoles, the big snakes eat the frogs. It's all kind of a self.
Some, or did they just
The mosquito fish were deliberately put in a number of years ago. And from what I recall, Zach and Megan collected them and then just dumped them in the ponds. And of course our koi, they take advantage of a lot of the emergent vegetation as well as the tadpoles, as well as the minnows. So everybody's kind of eating everybody, but there's enough environment here to keep a turnover of all of these things that they're pretty self-regulating. And I would call them friends. In fact, I call most of what we have in the garden friends. There's a handful of things that, although I know they serve a function, a little harder to call them friends. And those would probably, I'd say voles are real high on that list. Aphids can be real high on that list. Occasionally, a few of the introduced insects, very high on that list. Among them, fire ants and needle ants, both of which are exotic introductions. So a lot of times, many of the pests aren't even native, especially some of the ones with the wider negative impacts. And with regards to controlling large mammals, there are always also legal issues, so you have to be really careful. You can't just get out and willy-nilly shoot deer and coyotes and foxes, even though a lot of people would want to. You just have to look into your immediate environment, your immediate needs, and look at ways that you might can control it with a low impact, low cost, and low collateral damage. And that's really the thing we have to look at. If we use this particular method to control a pest, what are the potential collateral damages? And I like to advise people to take that into consideration, especially if you yourself have pets, or if there are things in your yard you like. How many of you like your butterflies and your bees? There's very little you can spray to control any kind of insect that is not going to negatively impact those. And that's things to consider. And systemics, how many of you have heard of systemic pesticides? They're great for plants that are potted or in your house or something that you've got a scale insect or aphids. But once that is used in the garden setting, you're thinking, okay, anything that eats the leaves is going to be impacted by that, right? But what about the flowers, the nectar, and the pollen? Most people don't consider the fact that a lot of systemics can actually have an impact even on that part of the plant. So even here, when we are controlling, and even some of the topicals, when we're controlling, we're real careful. Is the plant in flower? And if it's in flower, we might want to look at an alternate means of control because we don't want to impact our bees and butterflies. So, anybody else with a friend or a foe in their yard that they want to encourage or discourage? Certainly I couldn't have answered all those questions. I didn't talk that long.
My mom, weeding things that aren't weeds.
Weeding things that aren't weeds.
That was a joke.
That sounds like a cultural control you're going to have to manage in your own household.
You gotta manage your mom.
Yeah, we run into that in the garden here too. Is this a weed? You ask that before you do that. Ask before it's in your hand. Sometimes that's hard. You know what a weed is, right? What's the definition of a weed?
A plant
Simply
out of place.
A plant that's growing in a place you don't want it.
That's it. That's a weed.
There are a lot of plants here we put on purpose, but then they pop up somewhere else, and then that one's the plant, that one's the weed. Perspective, and a lot of people don't realize it's perspective. Like I said, one person's pest is another person, and one person's foe is another person's friend. I personally kind of like all the wildlife in my yard, and yeah, I get up in the morning sometimes and something's been eaten and it's like, no. But I also realize the plant usually will come back. It's an aesthetic. Voles, they got a purpose. Things eat them. But if I had to pick one animal, that one would probably be my least favorite. Any other questions? Butterfly gardens or things people want to do in their yard to encourage, discourage? How many of you gonna let the snakes stay in your yard? Raise your hand. Keep the snakes.
Snakes.
Oh, you're not gonna raise your hand? No, you don't like snakes.
I don't like snakes.
You don't like snakes? You just avoid them though?
What am I supposed to just shoo them away?
No, just walk away.
Walk away and let them go the wrong way. Okay.
Yeah, they're gonna go their own way. Just walk away. How many of you have ever had to fight the battles of soils? Because see, soil, I consider that a friend or foe. How many of you deal with the red clay? Red clay and rocks.
In Fuquay we got sand.
I was about to say, I am 8 miles southeast of here. I am loamy sand.
You're great.
And when I was house hunting, I was like, please don't give me, here's the file. Well, I sat down with the real estate agent and showed her, well, I've never heard of that, and I'm from North Carolina. The house is on this side of that line.
That's right.
But again, when you're planting, when you're considering your garden, another thing that I did not mention that I'd like to, a lot of times the foes that we have in our gardens are a response to plants that are stressed. And a lot of times stressed plants are bigger, greater targets than our healthy plants. And a lot of times people don't realize that in your soil type and your lighting. Remember, right plant, right place, right soil, right light. Just because you like the plant doesn't mean you have the yard for it. So always consult our staff. Give them the conditions of your yard. What is our soil like? How much water, shade, light? These are really important things. Healthy plants need less care and less protection.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I have trouble with, which is cedar hawthorn rust on hawthorns and service berries. And what I read is some years it can be worse than others. Are there any cultural controls like picking off the leaves where I see spots, or really just leave it to be?
There's a combination of things. Sometimes rusts, which are cyclic and environmentally induced, are really more of a symptom of maybe something bigger, or they themselves are just a minor inconvenience, like for you a sunburn or a heat rash, some sort of an inconvenience that will pass. I would look at the health of the plant. I would also make sure that you're diagnosing whatever the pathogen is, and also make sure things like that are not contagious. And another thing too with gardening tools, just like with surgical equipment, I cannot encourage enough, always clean your tools between plants. We get our clippers out there and we get happy. Please clean your clippers between plants, because
I never clean my clippers.
you never clean your clippers. You gonna clean them now?
I will now.
You know how to clean them? It's real easy.
Dip them in water.
Alcohol.
Okay.
Just get you some alcohol. That's the easy one. Another one, you can also use ammonia. And you can also use one of those like little propane torches. You heat that thing. That's probably the best, because then it's really sterilized. But ammonia or alcohol, both are pretty good at stripping off any pathogens like fungus. Yeah, you gotta be real careful, because if you've got like fungus, or you're mentioning an infection in a plant, certainly if you're gonna cut and remove that, because again, there's foe, you don't want to transmit that to another plant. So always try to be conscious of your tools that come in contact with plant tissue. Wash them off. Even something as simple a lot of times is just letting your shovel or whatever sit out in the hot sun. Just let the sun irradiate it and sterilize it. That's even better than nothing. So always try to keep your tools clean, and when you're out in the yard, clean your tools between plants.
What about like soil hygiene? So, for example, when I first started gardening, I wouldn't transfer soil anywhere around the yard. Like, I dig a hole, amend that soil if need be, plant that plant. Whereas now that we're doing so many plants, it's just easier to kind of take out a wheelbarrow. One wheelbarrow, in goes the bad soil, in goes the soil that we've already amended, and then once this fills up, we amend all that.
That's beyond the scope of really things I would normally talk about, but I will say this. Most of the time, not an issue. There are some things, so like fusarium. And one of the really scary things to me is that if you purchase a plant from somewhere and it has fusarium, I can't say it now, a wilt, and you plant it in the ground.
A wilt, you said?
Yeah, fusarium. Wilt. I don't know why I was getting tongue twisted on it. There are things like that that can actually contaminate the soil for a very, very long time. And so you end up planting your plant gets sick, you identify the issue, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, there's some of these things really that almost require removing the soil. This is where it becomes a problem if you have had a plant that you know has been impacted by something like fusarium wilt, which is root rot. It's a fancy word for one of the root rots. That can go dormant in the soil for a very long time. Southern wilt is another one. Blight, southern wilt.
First, you can layer it with plastic and let you can get the soil temp up to like 120 or something.
Black plastic, that's one way. Another thing, there are things like xylitol that you can use to treat the soil, highly oxygenated.
Oh, okay.
There are ways, but what he's talking about is I'm going to take some backfill soil. Not a problem unless you know you've had a problem. If you've had some plants that have shown issues of disease or sickness and you're digging them out and you're taking that soil, I would be very careful where I took that soil. And if you run into a problem, it becomes systemic. And you notice 2 or 3 plants are kind of getting something, they're wilting, yellowing out, and just you take them up and the roots are all rotted. I'd be very careful with that. Try to get that identified. Because if that's definitely a foe, and that's a foe that's going to be in the soil for a long time. And a lot of times people will notice that I keep planting things here and everything I plant here dies. There might be a reason for that. But what you're talking about, be very careful. And as long as your plants and everything seem healthy, I would be less concerned.
Right.
You get an area in your yard where you're seeing a lot of plant death and it seems to be kind of random. And when I say random, it's this plant, another plant, and maybe they're not the same kind of plant, but they seem to show the same kind of problem. That's suggesting to me that there's a pathogen that's probably now in the soil.
How about plant rotation when you got beds and you put marigolds there every year, or begonias or whatever? Should we rotate that every 3 or 4 years?
Depends on what your goal is. If you're looking at ornamental gardens and you have a preference for a particular kind of flower or plant that you want to plant there year after year because, hey, it's your tradition.
Well, in tobacco crops, you know,
You can't, well, and a lot of that was because you're looking at high cash crops, things that you're selling, and so you're considering flavor, you're considering health and production.
Okay.
And you don't want to exhaust the soil. When we're looking at our home gardens, there's generally enough available fertilizers and all that we can treat that, keep that going. So I don't worry as much about that. Just if your plants start looking malnourished, you can address the soil. But as far as living with different plants and animals, a lot of times they're considered friends because most of the time, who are our friends? Colorful, don't bite, don't sting, fluffy, warm-blooded. And our foes are oftentimes what we perceive, scaly, cold-blooded, bite, sting. It doesn't always work that way. A lot of times things bite and sting and things that are scaly and cold are actually better to have in your yard to control the things that you think are cute and pretty, which are actually your problem. So a lot of times kind of educate yourself, and it's really difficult to, you could take a whole semester in college, a school, just on that one subject and still not be able to address it. So I just tell people be informed, and when you find things in your yard, ask those questions. What is it doing? Am I benefiting more? And it might even be causing some damage, but maybe the damage is really small, the benefits outweigh the damage. So educate, and you're always welcome to contact us. You can take pictures, you can send us by email. My name is Bill Reynolds, so you feel free to email me, take pictures, attach the pictures. We're happy to try to address questions. If I can't answer it, I'll try to find someone here who can. We'll try to direct you to a place that can. And if you're interested in more plants and see things here in the garden that you like, please look for the tags. Take a picture of the plant, take a picture of the flowers. Sales staff over here, you can show them, say, hey, I like this. Do you guys carry it? Hopefully we do. They can help you find it. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. I really appreciate all of you. And I hope I covered the subject.
It was great.
Pretty well. I wish we had more butterflies and things flying around to look at, but we're kind of in that first wave from spring and now getting ready for the summer and a little alternating overcast.